The first gunshot echoed through the valley just as Lillian Nelson folded the last of her husband's shirts into the worn leather trunk. 3 months of marriage had taught her that Thomas Nelson's promises were as empty as the pantry he left behind. The second gunshot confirmed what she already feared: he wasn't coming back. Colorado Territory, 1876. Lillian had come west with dreams as vast as the prairie sky, only to find herself abandoned in a half-built cabin 10 miles from the nearest town. At 22, she was already a widow, or might as well be, considering Thomas had disappeared with the last of their money, their only horse, and her wedding band, which he'd pried from her finger while she slept, claiming he needed to have it polished in town. The winter wind howled through the gaps in the cabin walls as Lillian wrapped herself in the single woolen blanket Thomas hadn't thought to take. 3 days without food had made her lightheaded, and the firewood would last another night at most. Her fingers, red and raw from the cold, trembled as she touched the small bundle of possessions she'd brought from Boston, a cameo brooch from her mother, a dog-eared copy of Wordsworth's poems, and a daguerreotype of her parents. "I will not die here," she whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. "I will not give him the satisfaction." The snow had been falling for 2 days straight, and the path to town would be impassable on foot. Lillian knew her choices were simple: wait for spring and certain starvation, or try to reach town and risk freezing to death. Neither option seemed particularly appealing. She had just decided to conserve her energy when a sound broke through the howling wind, the distinct rhythm of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. For a wild moment, hope flared in Lillian's chest. Had Thomas returned? Had he found whatever he was looking for in town and decided to come back to her? But as quickly as the hope had risen, it was extinguished by cold reality. Thomas wouldn't return, not after stealing everything of value. More likely, it was one of the desperate outlaws who roamed these parts, looking for easy pickings. Lillian's gaze darted to the rifle mounted above the door, unloaded, of course. Thomas had taken the ammunition. The hoofbeats stopped. Heavy boots crunched in the snow, approaching the door. Lillian grabbed the poker from beside the nearly dead fire, the only weapon within reach. Her heart hammered against her ribs as 3 solid knocks echoed through the cabin. "Hello? Anybody home?" A deep voice, weathered but not unkind, called from outside. Lillian held her breath, the poker clutched in white-knuckled hands. "Madam, I saw the smoke from your chimney. I've got supplies if you need 'em. This storm's only going to get worse." Supplies. The word made Lillian's empty stomach clench painfully. Still, she hesitated, her back pressed against the rough-hewn wall beside the door. "I'm Liam Garrett, madam. I run cattle about 5 miles east. I'm just checking on folks before this blizzard sets in proper." The name meant nothing to Lillian, but the sincerity in the voice gave her pause. Slowly, she moved toward the door. Poker still at the ready. "How do I know you're not here to rob me?" she called out, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. A low chuckle came from the other side of the door. "Well, madam, if I was aiming to rob you, I reckon I wouldn't have knocked first, and I certainly wouldn't have brought fresh bread and coffee." The mention of food was enough to override Lillian's caution. With trembling fingers, she lifted the wooden latch and pulled the door open just enough to peer out. The man standing on her doorstep was tall, his broad shoulders dusted with snow. A dark Stetson covered most of his face, but Lillian could see a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard. In his arms was a burlap sack, and the unmistakable scent of fresh bread wafted toward her. "Mr. Garrett?" Lillian's voice was barely a whisper. The man lifted his head, and Lillian found herself looking into the kindest pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. Crow's feet at the corners suggested he smiled often, though his expression now was serious, as he took in her disheveled appearance and the poker in her hand. "Yes, madam? May I come in? It's colder than a banker's heart out here." Lillian hesitated only a moment before stepping back, allowing him entry. As he ducked through the doorway, she noticed how he filled the small cabin with his presence, not threatening, but solid and reassuring. "Thank you," she said, setting the poker aside but keeping it within reach. "I'm Lillian Nelson," Liam nodded, setting the sack on the table. "Pleasure, Mrs. Nelson. Is your husband about?" The question sent a fresh wave of humiliation through Lillian. "He's gone to town," she lied, unwilling to admit to this stranger that she'd been abandoned. Liam's eyes flicked to her face, then around the cabin, taking in the nearly empty shelves, the dying fire, and the single trunk in the corner. His expression revealed nothing, but Lillian had the distinct impression he didn't believe her. "Well then, Mrs. Nelson, I hope you don't mind if I share some provisions. I was heading back from town myself when I saw your chimney smoke. Thought I'd check in, what with the storm coming." He began unpacking the sack, placing items on the table: a loaf of bread still warm from the oven, a small sack of coffee beans, dried beef, a jar of preserves, and, miracle of miracles, a small sack of flour and another of sugar. The sight of so much food made Lillian's knees weak. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, hoping Liam wouldn't notice. He noticed. "When's the last time you ate, Mrs. Nelson?" Lillian lifted her chin. "I had some tea this morning," she said, the lie brittle on her tongue. Liam said nothing, just reached back into the sack and pulled out a tin of crackers, which he opened and placed in front of her. "No offense meant, madam, but you look like you might blow away in the next gust. Please, help yourself." Pride warred with hunger for all of 3 seconds before Lillian took a cracker, then another, forcing herself to eat slowly, despite the desperate emptiness in her stomach. Liam busied himself at her stove, adding wood from a supply he'd brought in, setting water to boil for coffee. His movements were efficient and unobtrusive, as if he understood her need to maintain some dignity. "Your husband leave you enough firewood?" he asked, his back to her as he measured coffee into the pot. Lillian swallowed hard. "I'm sure he'll bring more when he returns from town." Liam nodded, not turning around. "And when might that be?" "Soon," Lillian said, the word hollow even to her own ears. "Any day now." The cabin filled with the rich aroma of coffee as Liam poured 2 cups, setting one before Lillian. She wrapped her cold fingers around the warm mug, inhaling the steam. "Thank you," she said, and meant it more deeply than she could express. Liam sat across from her, his large frame making the crude chair look like a child's seat. "Mrs. Nelson," he began, then stopped, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I don't mean to pry, but I know Thomas Nelson. Everyone in these parts does." Lillian's cheeks burned with shame. Of course this stranger knew her husband knew what kind of man he was. "He's not coming back, is he?" Liam asked gently. Lillian stared into her coffee, unable to meet those perceptive blue eyes. "No," she whispered. "I don't believe he is." Liam nodded, unsurprised. "He took everything? Everything of value, the horse, our money, even my wedding ring." Lillian's voice broke on the last word, not from sentimentality but from the sheer humiliation of it. Liam's jaw tightened, and for a moment Lillian glimpsed a harder man beneath the kindly exterior. "That's not the first time he's done something like that." Lillian looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Thomas Nelson has brought at least 3 wives out here in the past 5 years. Sets them up, takes what he can, then disappears. Usually he sells the property before he goes." The revelation hit Lillian like a physical blow. He said we were married in the church in Denver," she said, her voice small. "He had papers." Liam's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Miss." "Lillian," she said. "Just Lillian, please." "Lillian," he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her chest tighten. "Thomas Nelson isn't even his real name, far as anyone can tell. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is getting you through this winter." Lillian squared her shoulders. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Garrett, but I can manage on my own." A ghost of a smile touched Liam's lips. "I don't doubt your spirit, but this isn't Boston. Winter out here kills even the strongest, best-prepared folks sometimes." "How did you know I'm from Boston?" Lillian asked, startled. Liam's smile widened slightly. "Your accent and the copy of Wordsworth on your shelf. Not common reading out here." Lillian found herself returning his smile, the first time she'd done so in weeks. I'm afraid I'm not well suited to frontier life. I came west because—" She trailed off, embarrassed by her own naivety. "Because you wanted adventure? A fresh start?" Liam suggested. "Nothing wrong with that. Most of us came west for similar reasons." "And what was yours, Mr. Garrett?" Lillian asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Liam's eyes took on a distant look. "War changes a man. After Gettysburg, I couldn't go back to Pennsylvania, to all those ghosts. Needed open sky and room to breathe." "You fought for the Union?" "Yes, madam. 7th Pennsylvania Cavalry." A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the ill-fitted windows. Liam glanced toward the door, his expression turning serious. "I need to ask you something, Lillian, and I want you to know it comes with no obligation and no expectations." Lillian tensed, suddenly wary again. "My ranch has a small cabin for hands empty now for the winter. It's warm, solid, has its own stove. You'd be welcome to stay there until spring or until you decide what you want to do next." Lillian blinked, taken aback by the offer. "I couldn't possibly." "You wouldn't be the first person I've helped through a hard winter," Liam interrupted gently. "And I'd sleep better knowing you weren't out here alone with no supplies." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Lillian asked, genuine confusion in her voice. Liam's expression was steady. "Because out here, helping your neighbor isn't charity, it's survival. And because I've seen what happens to folks who try to face a Colorado winter unprepared." The memory of the gunshots Lillian had heard earlier that day suddenly returned to her. "Those shots I heard this morning," Liam's face darkened. "Jenkins' family 5 miles west ran out of food last week. Father couldn't bear to watch his children starve." He looked away. "I was too late." Horror washed over Lillian as the implication sank in. "All of them?" Liam nodded grimly. "All of them. That's why I've been checking every homestead I can reach before the worst of the storm hits." Lillian's hands trembled around her coffee cup. The reality of her situation crashed down upon her with terrible clarity. If Liam hadn't happened by— "You don't have to decide now," Liam said, standing up. "I'll bring in more firewood, enough for a few days. If you choose to stay, at least you'll be warm. If you decide to accept my offer, I'll come back tomorrow morning. Either way, the food is yours." As he moved toward the door, panic seized Lillian. The thought of being alone again in this desolate cabin was suddenly unbearable. "Wait," she called out. I'd like to accept your offer, Mr. Garrett, if it still stands." Relief washed over Liam's face. "It stands. Pack whatever you need. I'll load the firewood, then we'll head out. The storm's only going to get worse." Within the hour, Lillian had gathered her few possessions into her trunk, and Liam had loaded it onto his sturdy wagon. He wrapped her in a thick buffalo robe before helping her onto the seat beside him. As they pulled away from the cabin, Lillian didn't look back. There was nothing there for her now, just another empty promise in a life that had seen too many. The journey to Liam's ranch was arduous, the wind whipping snow into their faces despite the protection of the wagon's canvas cover. Lillian huddled beneath the buffalo robe. Her body pressed against Liam's solid warmth for survival rather than impropriety. Neither spoke much, conserving energy against the brutal cold. When they finally crested a small rise, Lillian saw a cluster of buildings nestled in a protected valley below. Smoke rose from 2 chimneys, one from a sturdy 2-story main house, the other from a smaller cabin about 50 yards away. "Circle G," Liam said, his voice carrying pride. "Not the biggest spread in Colorado, but it's mine, free and clear." As they approached, a tall, lanky man emerged from a barn, waving. "That's Hank, my foreman," Liam explained. "Best cowhand in 3 counties, and a fair cook to boot." Hank helped them unload Lillian's trunk into the small cabin, which, true to Liam's word, was clean, solid, and warm. A fire already blazed in the stone fireplace, and the single room was simply but comfortably furnished with a bed, table, 2 chairs, and a small cookstove. "I took the liberty of having Hank prepare it," Liam said, looking suddenly uncertain. "I hope that wasn't presumptuous." Lillian took in the cabin 10 times cozier than the drafty shack Thomas had abandoned her in, and felt tears prick her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Liam said, his voice gruff with emotion he seemed unwilling to show. "There's food in the cupboard, linens in the chest, and plenty of firewood stacked outside. The main house is just yonder if you need anything. We take supper at 6, and you're welcome to join us." With that, he tipped his hat and left, closing the door behind him with gentle care that spoke volumes about the man. Alone in the cabin, Lillian sank onto the edge of the bed, running her hand over the clean quilt. For the first time in months, she felt safe. The realization brought a fresh wave of tears, not of despair this time, but of overwhelming relief. By the time 6 o'clock arrived, Lillian had washed with water heated on her own stove, changed into her cleanest dress, and pinned her hair up as neatly as she could. The walk to the main house was short, but bracing in the cold evening air. Hank opened the door before she could knock, ushering her into a warm kitchen filled with the aroma of beef stew and fresh bread. "Welcome to Circle G, Mrs. Nelson," he said, his manner respectful but friendly. "Thank you, but please call me Lillian," she replied, removing her shawl. Liam appeared from what appeared to be a study, a ledger in his hand. He had changed as well. His rough work clothes replaced by a clean shirt, and his hair still damp from washing. The sight of him tall and straight-backed, his face clean-shaven now to reveal a strong jaw, and those kind eyes caused a flutter in Lillian's chest that had nothing to do with hunger or fear. "You came," he said, a smile breaking across his features. "I smelled the stew from my cabin," Lillian replied, returning his smile. "How could I resist?" Dinner was a simple but hearty affair. Hank, it turned out, was indeed a fair cook, and the conversation flowed easily between the three of them. Lillian learned that Liam had come to Colorado in '68, had built his ranch from nothing, and now ran 500 head of cattle with the help of Hank and 3 other hands who were currently in town for the winter. "And you, Lillian?" Hank asked. "How'd a Boston lady end up in these parts?" Lillian hesitated, but Liam's encouraging nod gave her courage. "I was teaching at a girls' school in Boston. Mr. Nelson came through town on business and attended a church social where I was playing the piano. He painted such a picture of the West, adventure, opportunity, a chance to help build something new." "And you fell in love with the dream," Liam said softly. Lillian nodded. "I had no family left after my parents passed. The school was my whole life, but it felt small somehow. Thomas offered marriage and a new beginning. I thought it was Providence. There's no shame in believing the best of people," Liam said, "even when they don't deserve it." After dinner, Hank excused himself to check on the livestock, leaving Lillian and Liam alone by the fire. A comfortable silence settled between them as they sipped coffee. "I want to work," Lillian said suddenly, "to earn my keep here." Liam looked up, surprised. "That's not necessary." "It is to me," Lillian interrupted firmly. "I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Garrett." "Liam," he corrected gently, "and it's not charity. It's neighborliness." "Nevertheless," Lillian persisted, "I'm capable and willing to work. I can cook, clean, mend whatever is needed." Liam studied her for a long moment, respect evident in his gaze. "Hank and I manage well enough, but I won't deny the place could use a woman's touch. If you're determined, we can work something out." "Thank you," Lillian said, relieved. As Liam walked her back to her cabin through the swirling snow, he paused at her door. "Lillian," he said, his voice serious, "I want you to know something. You're safe here. No obligations, no expectations. When spring comes, if you want to move on to Denver or back east, I'll help you get there." In the moonlight filtering through the clouds, his face was half in shadow, but Lillian could see the sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "Good night, Liam." "Good night, Lillian." As she closed the door, Lillian leaned against it, her heart pounding inexplicably. In just one day, her life had transformed from desperation to something like hope. And at the center of that transformation was a tall cowboy with kind eyes who asked for nothing in return for his generosity. "Don't be a fool, Lillian," she whispered to herself. "You barely know him." Yet, As she readied herself for bed, she couldn't help but contrast Liam's quiet strength with Thomas's flashy charm. Thomas had wooed her with grand promises and poetry. Liam had simply offered bread and shelter with no strings attached. Thomas had taken everything. Liam had given without expectation of return. Falling asleep in a warm bed with a full stomach, Lillian pushed away thoughts of what might lie ahead. For now, survival was enough. Tomorrow would take care of itself. The blizzard raged for 3 days, sealing the Circle G in a cocoon of white. Lillian quickly established a routine, rising early to help Hank prepare breakfast for the 3 of them, then spending her days cleaning the main house, which clearly hadn't seen a woman's touch in years. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from the uncertainty of her future. Liam spent most daylight hours checking on the cattle, ensuring they had access to feed despite the deep snow. He returned each evening tired but satisfied, his presence at dinner a highlight of Lillian's day. Their conversations ranged from books they'd read to places they'd seen, politics to philosophy. To Lillian's surprise, Liam was well educated. Having attended 2 years at a college in Pennsylvania before the war interrupted his studies. "You're not what I expected a cattle rancher to be," she admitted one evening as they sat by the fire, Hank having retired early with a toothache. Liam chuckled. "And what did you expect?" "I'm not entirely sure. Someone rougher, I suppose. Less thoughtful." "You mean less bookish," Liam said, gesturing to the volume of Emerson they'd been discussing. "My father was a schoolteacher. He believed education was the only true wealth a man could possess." "A wise man," Lillian said. "I'd have liked to meet him." "He'd have liked you," Liam replied, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than was strictly proper. "He always said the measure of a person was how they handled adversity. By that standard, you're quite remarkable." Lillian looked away, uncomfortable with the compliment. "I've hardly handled anything well. I was naive enough to believe Thomas, desperate enough to marry a stranger, and helpless enough to nearly starve to death in that cabin." "And brave enough to survive," Liam countered, "strong enough to start again." When Lillian didn't respond, Liam changed the subject. "Tell me about Boston." "I've never been further east than St. Louis." Grateful for the shift, Lillian described her childhood in Boston, the busy harbor, the cobblestone streets, the libraries and concert halls. As she spoke, she realized how much she missed the cultural life of the city, yet couldn't imagine returning to its confines after experiencing the vast openness of the Colorado Territory. "Sometimes I think I don't belong anywhere anymore," she confessed. "Too eastern for the West, too western for the East." Liam's smile was understanding. "That feeling passes. Eventually, you realize home isn't about where you're from, it's about where you choose to put down roots." His words stayed with Lillian long after she'd returned to her cabin that night. Where would she choose to put down roots? And could those roots possibly take hold here, at Circle G? As January gave way to February, and February to March, Lillian found herself settling into life at the ranch with surprising ease. The heavy snows gradually receded, revealing patches of muddy ground that promised spring's eventual arrival. With the improving weather came more work-mending fences damaged by winter, preparing for calving season, planting the garden Lillian had suggested they plant near her cabin. One crisp March morning, Lillian was hanging laundry to dry in the brisk wind when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Shading her eyes against the sun, she saw 3 riders approaching from the direction of town. As they drew closer, she recognized Hank leading the way, followed by 2 young men she hadn't met, presumably the other hands, returning for spring work. Liam emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag as he walked to meet them. Lillian watched the reunion from a distance, struck by the easy camaraderie between the men. Liam's laughter carried on the wind as one of the hands apparently shared a humorous tale from town. Suddenly self-conscious about her place here, Lillian turned back to her laundry. She had no claim on Circle G or its owner, despite the warmth that had grown between them over the winter months. With the return of the other hands, would her presence still be welcome? Or would Liam now expect her to move on, as he'd mentioned that first night? The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest. Somehow, without her noticing, Circle G had begun to feel like home. "Lillian!" Liam's voice broke into her thoughts. He was walking toward her, the three men following a respectful distance behind. "Come meet the rest of our outfit." Our outfit. The casual inclusion sent a wave of relief through Lillian. Introductions were made: Pete Wilson, a freckle-faced young man of perhaps 20, and Miguel Vasquez, slightly older with a quiet dignity about him. Both men were unfailingly polite, tipping their hats and addressing her as Miss Lillian, after Hank quietly corrected Pete's initial, Mrs. Nelson. "The boys brought mail," Liam said, holding out an envelope. "This came for you, care of the general store." Lillian took the letter with surprise. "For me? But who would—" Her voice trailed off as she recognized the handwriting. "It's from my friend Sarah, from the school in Boston. But how did she know to send it here?" "Word gets around," Liam said with a shrug. "Thomas was seen in Denver bragging about his latest— well, you understand. Someone who knew I'd been checking homesteads must have mentioned you were staying at Circle G." Lillian clutched the letter, a lifeline to her old world. "Thank you for bringing it." Later, alone in her cabin, Lillian opened the letter with trembling fingers. "My dearest Lillian," Sarah wrote, "you cannot imagine my relief at hearing you are safe. When we received no word from you for months, I feared the worst. The headmistress has kept your position open, believing as I did that something must have prevented you from writing. If you wish to return to Boston, the school will welcome you with open arms." The letter continued, full of news from the school and inquiries about Lillian's welfare. Sarah had enclosed enough money for a train ticket east, should Lillian wish to return. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Lillian read the letter 3 times, tears blurring her vision. Here was her way back to the life she'd known: secure, predictable, respectable. Why, then, did the prospect fill her with such ambivalence? A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She hastily wiped her eyes before opening it to find Liam standing there, hat in hand. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "I just wanted to make sure the letter wasn't bad news." "Not bad, exactly," Lillian said, stepping back to allow him entry. It wasn't proper to invite a man into her cabin alone, but somehow such concerns seemed trivial after all they'd shared. "My friend has kept my teaching position open. She sent money for my return to Boston." Liam's expression remained carefully neutral. "I see. That's good news, then." "Yes," Lillian agreed, though her tone lacked conviction. "When will you leave?" Liam asked, his voice even. Lillian looked up at him, searching his face for— what? Disappointment? Regret? His blue eyes revealed nothing of his thoughts. "I haven't decided that I will," she said softly. Something flickered in Liam's expression, hope, perhaps, or relief. "The choice is yours, of course, but—" He hesitated, seeming to struggle with his words. "I hope you know you have a place here if you want it." "As your housekeeper?" Lillian asked, needing clarity. Liam's cheeks colored slightly. "As whatever you wish to be, Lillian." "I won't presume to—" He stopped, took a deep breath, and started again. "When I found you in that cabin, half-starved and abandoned, I admired your courage. Over these months I've come to admire much more your intelligence, your resilience, your kindness." Lillian's heart began to race. "Liam, please let me finish," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I'm not Thomas Nelson. I don't make promises lightly or paint pretty pictures to get what I want. What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that I care for you, Lillian, deeply. If Boston is where your heart lies, I'll wish you well and mean it. But if there's any chance your future might be here—" His voice trailed off, leaving the question unspoken. Lillian stared at him, this good man who had saved her life and asked for nothing in return, who had given her space to heal, to find her strength again, who looked at her now not with expectation, but with hope. "I need time," she whispered, "to be sure." Liam nodded, relief evident in his posture. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I've waited this long to speak. I can wait longer for your answer." After he left, Lillian sat for a long while, Sarah's letter in one hand, her heart in turmoil. Boston represented safety, familiarity. Circle G offered, what? A chance at something new, something real, something that frightened and excited her in equal measure. That night she wrote to Sarah, thanking her for the opportunity to return, but explaining she wasn't ready to make that decision yet. I've changed, she wrote. The West has changed me. I'm not sure the woman I've become would fit back into the life I left behind. As spring bloomed across the ranch, Lillian found herself busier than ever. With calving season in full swing, everyone worked from dawn till dusk. She took over the cooking entirely, ensuring the men had hearty meals to sustain them through the long days. She planted her garden, tended the chickens Liam had purchased at her suggestion, and even learned to ride the gentle mare he'd given her to use. Though Liam never pressed her for an answer to his unspoken question, Lillian felt his eyes on her, often not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a warmth that made her increasingly certain of her own feelings. Then came the day that changed everything. Lillian was in the garden, weeding the newly sprouted vegetable rows, when she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. Looking up, she saw a vehicle she didn't recognize coming down the road toward Circle G. As it drew closer, she made out two figures on the seat, a man and a woman. Standing, she brushed dirt from her skirts and walked toward the main house, curious about these unexpected visitors. Liam emerged from the barn at the same time, striding toward the approaching wagon. As the vehicle pulled to a stop in the yard, Lillian froze. The man climbing down from the driver's seat was unmistakable Thomas Nelson. "Well, well," he called out, his voice carrying the same charismatic charm that had once captivated her. "If it isn't my dear wife?" Lillian's blood ran cold. Beside her, she felt rather than saw Liam stiffen. "Thomas," she acknowledged, fighting to keep her voice steady, "what are you doing here?" Thomas smiled, that winning smile that had hidden so much deception. "Why, I've come to collect my wife, of course. Did you think I'd abandoned you, darling?" The woman still seated in the wagon let out a derisive snort. Younger than Lillian, perhaps 19 or 20, she was pretty in a harsh way, her painted lips curved in a cynical smile. "You're not welcome here, Nelson," Liam said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Or whatever your real name is." Thomas's smile didn't waver. "It's a free country, Garrett, and I've come for what's mine." "I am not yours," Lillian said, finding her voice at last. "You abandoned me to die in that cabin. You stole everything I had, including my wedding ring." "A misunderstanding," Thomas said smoothly. "I was forced to leave in haste due to some business matters. I always intended to return for you, my dear. And now I have." "The papers," Lillian said. "Our marriage papers. Were they even real?" For the first time, Thomas's confidence slipped slightly. "Of course they were. We were married by a judge in Denver." "Liar," the young woman in the wagon called out. "You told me those papers were fake, said you used them to trick rich Eastern girls." She turned to Lillian. "He's done the same to me, only I caught on quicker. Was taking me to New Mexico to do it all over again." Thomas's face darkened. "Shut your mouth, Clara." "Make me," she retorted. "I've had enough of your schemes. Was going to jump ship in the next town anyway." Liam had moved closer to Lillian, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. "You heard the ladies, Nelson. Your game's up. I suggest you get back in that wagon and keep moving. The sheriff in these parts knows all about you." Thomas's charming facade crumbled, replaced by the cold calculation Lillian had glimpsed only in their final days together. "I'll go," he said, "but not empty-handed. That cabin and land are in my name. I want compensation." "The cabin you left her in to starve?" Liam's voice was incredulous. "The land you never paid taxes on? That cabin?" Uncertainty flickered across Thomas's face. "I have papers." "Forgeries, most likely," Liam interrupted. "And even if they weren't, you abandoned the property. Under territorial law, you forfeited any claim months ago." Thomas's eyes darted between Liam and Lillian, assessing his options. His hand moved slightly toward his hip, where Lillian now noticed the outline of a pistol beneath his coat. "I wouldn't," Liam said quietly. Only then did Lillian realize that Hank and Miguel had emerged from the barn, rifles in hand. 4 against 1, Nelson. Bad odds, even for a con man. For a tense moment, Lillian thought Thomas might reach for his gun anyway, but then his shoulders slumped, the fight going out of him. Fine, he spat. Keep the worthless land. And her. He jerked his head toward Lillian. She wasn't worth the trouble anyway. He turned back to the wagon, but Clara was already climbing down the other side. I'm not going anywhere with you, she announced. I'll take my chances here. Thomas glared at her but seemed to recognize defeat. Without another word, he climbed onto the wagon seat, snapped the reins, and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and Clara's suitcase in the yard. As the wagon disappeared around the bend, Lillian realized she was trembling. Not from fear, but from an overwhelming sense of liberation. Thomas Nelson, or whatever his real name was, had no hold on her anymore. She was truly free. Liam's hand found hers, warm and steady. Are you all right? He asked softly. Lillian looked up at him, seeing concern in those blue eyes she'd come to know so well. Yes, she said, and meant it. For the first time in a very long time, I think I really am. Later that evening, after Clara had been settled in Lillian's old cabin, Lillian having moved to a room in the main house weeks earlier, once the other hands returned, Liam found Lillian sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Penny for your thoughts, he said, settling into the chair beside her. Lillian smiled. I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't knocked on my door that day. I'm glad I did, Liam said simply. So am I. Lillian turned to face him fully. I've made my decision, Liam. His expression grew serious, attentive. About Boston? About everything, she said. I'm staying. This is where I belong now. The joy that spread across Liam's face was like the sunrise. You're sure? More sure than I've ever been of anything. Lillian reached for his hand, a bold move for a woman raised with Boston propriety, but it felt right. These past months, you've shown me what a real man is. Liam Garrett, not with grand promises or fancy words, but with actions, with kindness and respect. Liam's fingers tightened around hers. I didn't do anything special, Lillian. Just what any decent person would do. That's where you're wrong, Lillian said softly. What you did, what you continue to do, is extraordinary. You gave me back my sense of worth when Thomas had stripped it away. You helped me find strength I didn't know I possessed. You always had that strength, Liam countered. You just needed space to discover it. Perhaps, Lillian conceded, but I found it here, with you. And I don't want to leave. Liam's eyes held hers, filled with an emotion that made her heart race. I don't want you to leave either. In fact, he hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. In his palm lay a simple gold band, nothing like the flashy ring Thomas had given her and then stolen back. This was plain, honest, beautiful in its simplicity. It was my mother's, Liam said, his voice husky. My father gave it to her when they had nothing but love and hope between them. They built a good life together, just as I hope. He took a deep breath. Lillian, I love you. Not because you needed saving or because you're beautiful though you are, but because your spirit matches mine. Because you make Circle G feel like home in a way it never has before. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Tears blurred Lillian's vision as she looked from the ring to Liam's face. Are you asking me to marry you, Liam Garrett? I am, he said, his smile tender. If you'll have me. Lillian didn't hesitate. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll have you. Liam slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if it had been made for her. Then he leaned forward and kissed her their first kiss, gentle yet promising, filled with all the words they didn't need to say. When they finally parted, Liam rested his forehead against hers. I was so afraid you'd choose Boston, he admitted. Lillian smiled, touching his cheek. Boston was my past. You're my future, Liam. You and Circle G and whatever life we build together. It won't always be easy, he warned. Ranching is hard work and the territory can be unforgiving. I know, Lillian said, but we'll face it together. That's what matters. As night fell over Circle G, Lillian knew she had found her true home at last, not in a place, but in a person. In Liam Garrett, with his kind eyes and steadfast heart, who had knocked on her door with bread when she was starving and a ring when she was ready. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in town, with Hank, Miguel, Pete, and even Clara in attendance. The Reverend Simmons, learning of their story, was visibly moved as he pronounced them husband and wife. "May your union be blessed with the same grace and compassion you have shown to others," he said, as Liam slipped the gold band back onto Lillian's finger this time. To stay. The celebration afterward at Circle G was simple but joyous. Neighbors from miles around came to wish them well, bringing food and small gifts. Many of the women embraced Lillian warmly, welcoming her to their community and promising friendship in the months to come. "You've done well for yourself, Mrs. Garrett," Clara said, approaching Lillian with a glass of punch. The young woman had remained at Circle G, taking over Lillian's role as cook and housekeeper. "Found yourself a good man." "So have you in a way," Lillian replied. "A good place to start fresh." Clara nodded, her eyes clearer now than when she'd arrived with Thomas. "I'm grateful. Not everyone gets a second chance." She glanced across the yard to where Pete was trying, rather obviously, not to stare at her. Or maybe a first real chance in my case. As the sun set on their wedding day, Liam found Lillian standing at the edge of the yard, looking out over the land that was now truly her home. "Happy, Mrs. Garrett?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Lillian leaned into him, feeling the solid strength that had become her anchor. "More than I ever thought possible," she said truthfully. "And you, Mr. Garrett? Any regrets about taking in a half-starved stranger?" Liam chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her side. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." Life at Circle G settled into a new rhythm. Lillian and Liam moved into the main house while Hank took over the foreman's cabin. Clara remained in the guest cabin, proving herself an able housekeeper and gradually earning the respect of everyone on the ranch, especially young Pete, whose admiration grew more obvious by the day. Spring gave way to summer, and the ranch prospered under their combined care. Lillian's garden yielded bountifully, and she began selling excess produce in town, using the money to purchase books for the small library she was creating in what had once been Liam's study. "We should build a proper schoolroom," Liam said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching lightning flicker in the distance. "There are a dozen children within riding distance who get no formal education." Lillian looked at him in surprise. "You want me to teach?" "If you'd like to," Liam said. "You said yourself you miss it sometimes, and this community needs someone with your knowledge and patience." The idea took root immediately in Lillian's heart. "I'd need supplies, books." "We'll get whatever you need," Liam promised. "We can use the back room of the barn for now. Fix it up proper. By next spring we could build something permanent." Lillian's smile widened. "By next spring we might need the space for something else as well." Liam's brow furrowed in confusion, then cleared as understanding dawned. "Lillian, are you—" She nodded, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. "Dr. Thompson confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. We're going to have a baby, Liam." The look of wonder that transformed his face was something Lillian knew she would remember all her days. Without a word, Liam dropped to his knees before her chair, pressing his face against her middle as if he could already feel the tiny life growing there. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." Lillian ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Our family," she corrected gently. "The beginning of it, anyway." Liam looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted. "After the war, I figured I'd live out my days alone on this ranch. And now you're stuck with a wife, a baby on the way, and plans for a school," Lillian teased gently. "Quite a change for a solitary cowboy." Liam stood, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "The best change," he murmured against her hair. "The very best." That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Liam's hand resting protectively over her stomach, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From Boston schoolteacher to abandoned bride to beloved wife and soon-to-be mother, a path she could never have imagined when she first set out for the West. "What are you thinking about?" Liam asked, his voice drowsy. "About how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads to the best thing," she replied. "If Thomas hadn't abandoned me, you wouldn't have found me." Liam pulled her closer. "I'd like to think we'd have found each other somehow," he said. "Some things are just meant to be." As winter approached once more, the schoolroom in the barn took shape. Families from miles around contributed what they could lumber: nails, a slate board, even a bell to call children to lessons. Word spread, and soon Lillian had commitments from 15 families to send their children come spring. Clara, to everyone's surprise, volunteered to assist with the younger students. "I never had much schooling myself," she admitted to Lillian. "Thought maybe I could learn alongside them." Pete's courtship of Clara had progressed from shy glances to Sunday walks to official courting with Liam's blessing. The transformation in the young woman was remarkable, the hard edges softening, the cynicism giving way to cautious hope. "You've created something special here," Reverend Simmons commented one Sunday after services, looking around at the growing community that had formed around Circle G. "More than a ranch or a school. You've built a place of second chances." Lillian, now visibly expecting and glowing with health, smiled as she watched Liam helping an elderly neighbor into her wagon. "We all deserve a second chance," she said. "Sometimes we just need someone to open the door." As December brought the first heavy snow, Circle G prepared for a quiet Christmas. Lillian, now in her 7th month, moved more slowly but refused to reduce her activities, much to Liam's consternation. "The baby will come when it's ready," she assured him as she hung evergreen boughs around the main room, "and I'm perfectly capable of decorating our home for Christmas." Liam hovered nearby, ready to catch her if she lost her balance. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever known," he grumbled, but the pride in his voice belied his words. On Christmas Eve, with a fire crackling in the hearth and candles gleaming on the small tree they'd cut from their own land, the entire Circle G family gathered in the main house. Hank, Miguel, Pete, Clara, and 2 new hands who joined in the fall all crowded around the table for a feast that Lillian and Clara had spent days preparing. After dinner, as was their tradition, each person shared something they were grateful for from the past year. "A fair calving season," Hank offered practically. "New friends," said Miguel, who had recently begun courting the widowed daughter of a neighboring rancher. "Second chances," Clara said softly, her hand finding Pete's under the table. When it came to Liam's turn, he stood, raising his glass. "This time last year, I rode out in a blizzard, checking on homesteads because it seemed the right thing to do. I found a half-starved woman too proud to admit she needed help." His eyes found Lillian's, filled with such love it took her breath away. "What I didn't know then was that I was the one who needed saving. From loneliness, from the ghosts of my past, from a life half-lived." He moved to Lillian's side, placing a hand on her rounded belly. "This year I'm grateful for the family we're building, for the love that walked into my life when I least expected it, but most needed it. For you, Lillian Garrett, and the miracle you've brought to Circle G." There wasn't a dry eye in the room as Lillian stood with difficulty to embrace her husband. "And I'm grateful for the man who knocked on my door with bread when I was hungry and a ring when I was whole again," she said, "for the home we've built together and the life growing between us." Later that night, as snow fell gently outside their window, Liam held Lillian close, his hand resting on the swell of their child. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Coming west, all you went through." Lillian considered the question honestly. "I regret my naivety," she admitted. "I regret trusting Thomas so blindly. But regret coming west? No. It brought me to you, to this life we're building. How could I regret that?" Liam's arms tightened around her. "I love you, Lillian Garrett, more than I have words to say." "Then show me," she whispered, turning in his embrace to face him. "We don't always need words." In the quiet of their bedroom, with the winter wind singing around the eaves of the home they'd made together, Liam did just that. Spring arrived with the wail of a newborn. Despite Dr. Thompson's presence, Lillian's labor had been long and difficult, leaving Liam pacing the porch for hours, deaf to the reassurances of Clara and the other women who had come to assist. When at last the doctor emerged, his face weary but smiling, Liam nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a daughter, Mr. Garrett," Dr. Thompson announced, "a strong, healthy girl, and your wife is asking for you." Liam entered the bedroom on unsteady legs. Lillian lay propped against pillows, her face pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. When she looked up at him, the love in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Liam approached the bed with reverence, peering down at the tiny face nestled against Lillian's breast. A shock of dark hair crowned the baby's head, and as he watched, she opened her eyes blue, like his own. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Would you like to hold her?" Lillian asked. With hands that had broken wild horses and built fences, but now trembled like leaves, Liam took his daughter into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. This miraculous being they had created together, yet he felt the weight of responsibility and love settle over him like a mantle. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your papa." As if in response, the baby's tiny hand escaped her swaddling and wrapped around his finger with surprising strength. In that moment, Liam Garrett, former soldier, rancher, husband, became something else entirely. A father, transformed by love in yet another way he hadn't expected. "What shall we call her?" Lillian asked, watching the two people she loved most in the world. Liam looked up, his eyes shining. "Hope," he said without hesitation. "Because that's what she is, what you both are to me." "Hope Sarah Garrett," Lillian agreed, adding her friend's name as a middle. "Welcome to Circle G, little one. Welcome home." The school opened 2 weeks after Hope's birth, with Clara taking primary responsibility while Lillian regained her strength. By summer, both women shared teaching duties, with baby Hope a constant presence, adored by students of all ages. As promised, Liam began construction on a proper schoolhouse to be completed before winter. The community rallied around the project, men from neighboring ranches offering labor, women providing meals for the workers. "You've changed this place," Hank commented to Liam one day as they surveyed the progress. "Used to be every ranch for itself out here. Now look at 'em, working together like they've been neighbors all their lives." Liam smiled, watching as Pete instructed a group of older boys in the proper way to set roof beams. Clara stood nearby, little Hope in her arms, offering encouragement. In the distance, Lillian was speaking with a group of mothers, likely discussing curriculum for the coming year. "It wasn't me," Liam said. "It was her. She brought something here that was missing." "Hope?" Hank suggested with a knowing look. "In more ways than one," Liam agreed. The years that followed brought changes to Circle G. Another child, a son they named William after Liam's father, expansion of the herd, improvements to the main house, the addition of an orchard that Lillian insisted would thrive despite skeptics. Through it all, the core of their life remained the same, the love that had begun when a desperate cowboy knocked on a cabin door, bringing bread to a hungry woman, and eventually, a ring to heal her broken heart. On their 5th anniversary, Liam surprised Lillian with a special gift, a small golden brooch in the shape of a loaf of bread. "To remember how we began," he said as he pinned it to her dress. Lillian laughed, her eyes bright with happy tears. "As if I could ever forget," she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "The day my life truly started." From the yard came the sounds of their children playing, Hope's confident voice directing her younger brother in some game of her invention. From the schoolhouse, now a proper building with glass windows and a bell tower, came the murmur of Clara's voice as she taught summer lessons to those children who wished to continue their education year-round. "Did you ever imagine this?" Lillian asked, gesturing to the thriving ranch around them. "That day when you rode out in the blizzard?" Liam pulled her close, breathing in the scent of lavender that had become home to him. "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "But now I can't imagine any other life." As the sun set over Circle G, painting the mountains gold and the plains purple, Liam and Lillian Garrett stood together on the porch of the home they'd built, not just of wood and stone, but of love, second chances, and the courage to begin again after loss. Their story, which had begun in hunger and desperation, had transformed into one of abundance of land and livestock, yes, but more importantly, of family and community, of purpose and belonging. From the darkest moment of Lillian's life had come the greatest light, proving that sometimes the end of one dream is merely the beginning of a greater one. And it had all started with a knock on a door, a loaf of bread, and the promise of a ring when the time was right.